Morning. Or, well, I guess it's still whatever time it was when you started watching this. Unless this isn't now a separate video. Is it? Mr. Editor? Wherever you are. I don't know how he interacts yet. I know he's here. I know there is an editor somewhere here. But I don't know. I don't know where he is. So I don't know if this is the same video or a second video. I don't know how this is going to be put together. But yesterday we made our stock. Got some sweet chamfered. None of this is sanded yet. I am fairly confident that I won't receive any splinters thanks to the chamfered corners. If you learned anything from. So this is called a half lap joint. It's going into, that's clamped to the table and everything. I'll use the other leg. The way these joints work is very, very simple. They go like that. And then the glue goes in there. Glue gets to cover, obviously, all of this surface, and then this surface, and this surface. There's a lot of surface area for glue to cover. This is a very simple joint, but it's pretty strong. And then the way that I'm using this half lap joint is I will also be running through mortise and tenon, or not through, sorry, a pocketed mortise and tenon into this. So it's held together in so many different ways. This will be a very strong joint. Lots of glue contact, lots of wood. Another aspect of traditional joinery is as the wood swells, it gets stronger, the joint strengthens. Adding wood glue to your project, wood glue is water-based. So you're adding water to the wood. So as you add the glue, it swells the wood as well as just the glue doing what the glue does. That all makes your joint stronger. So in fact, if you're cutting mortise and tenons or dovetails or things, you don't want them to be so tight that you have to beat them together. They should slide together. Firmly is not the right word. That is not the word that I'm looking for. But I'm only a few sips of coffee in, and my vocabulary is not woken up yet. They should slide together tightly, not tightly either. This should be, what is the word? Editor, help me. There's a word. Whatever. Hopefully he put a word somewhere in the screen. That's the word I mean. They should slide together like that. That way they're not super tight, not overly tight, but as the glue gets in there and does what it does, the joints swell up and there's room for the glue. It's another thing too. If your joints are too tight, when you push them together, you just push all the glue out the end or wherever it can go. And there's then no glue on your joint. So you don't want your joints overly tight. You also don't want them too loose, because with the way I've got these cut, I should really pull that out of the clamp so you can see it. But the corresponding half lap joints on the bottom spanner, that's all it is. It's just a couple cuts on that bottom spanner and a couple cuts on these legs. And when you put them together, when I put them together yesterday, they are square, perfectly square. They hold everything in alignment because I cut the cuts square. That's important. If your joints are too loose, it's not going to hold things square. So there is a happy middle ground between too tight and too loose, where everything's just right. Takes practice and a trial and error. Anyway, I started rambling. I'm gonna get these assembled, finish out my mortises, get the top piece on. It's not a ton to observe at present, but I'll update as we go. I did find something worth mentioning. Another aspect that the clients don't get to see, but is incredibly time consuming, is upkeep of the tools that you're using. This chisel, I don't remember, it was not cheap. It's hard to buy chisels that are made with good materials. I bought I don't remember the brand. I think it was maybe DeWalt or something. I brought some fine chisel, brand new chisel, because I needed something sharp for this project. Brought it back to the shop, and I think I cut one mortise, and it had chips out of the end. After just cutting wood, hitting nothing but wood, the things that it was meant to be cutting, and it just chipped the end of the steel. I spent much more money on this chisel, and it is a mortising chisel. This is a 1/4-inch chisel. It's very small. It's not a great comparison. Here we go. All right, these are both 1/2-inch chisels. They cut a 1/2-inch, whatever their chisel cuts. They would cut that part out. They cut because it wouldn't be a kerf, because it's a chisel. I don't know if there's a special word for that. Anyway, these are both 1/2-inch chisels. They cut a 1/2-inch. I did it again. I set myself up for failure. Oh. Okay. These are both 1/2-inch chisels. The difference being, this one is a mortising chisel. This one is just a chisel. They'll both cut the same size slot, or whatever you're doing with the chisel. But this one, because of the way it's shaped and the way it's built, this is specifically made for mortising. Anyway, I paid a little extra money for this. It's a good chisel. It performs way above what I was getting out of the other chisels. However, it's getting dull. This is just a personal problem, and sharpening is not difficult, especially when you have a good sharpening stone. And I use guides, so you just hook it up to the chisel and you do what the thing says. It's not difficult. It's tedious and time consuming, but it's not hard. But I hate it. I don't know why. I love to cook. I hate boiling water. I don't know why. Boiling water's not hard. There's nothing about it that's uncomfortable or difficult. You just put water in a pot and set it on the stove. But I hate boiling water. I don't know why. Same thing with this. I love woodworking. I love chiseling. I love making mortises. There's something cathartic about it when you have a really sharp chisel and you can just shave away the wood and you can watch magic happen. I hate sharpening things. I don't know why. Knives, chisels, anything, I can do it. I hate it. But that's the first thing I have to do, is sharpen this chisel. With a whetstone, as the name implies, it must be wet. Specifically, you're supposed to soak them. This is a Japanese whetstone. I don't know if there's anything special about it being Japanese. It's just, yeah. It's Japanese. I know Japanese craftsmen are known for their precision, so maybe that's why, or maybe it just came from Japan, and they're like, oh, that's a Japanese whetstone. We'll charge much more for it. Anyway, I gotta soak this for 20 minutes, so I'm gonna try and get through another mortise here with my dulling chisel and then give it a good sharpen. It's difficult to keep things from being dusty. Shot. Sit. And then this is just my life for a while. This is what I do. Very careful to make sure you're holding things flat. And make sure you have flattened the stone. And stop occasionally to see where you're actually hitting, what you're taking off. Make sure you're doing what you want to be doing. I know what I need. I just invented something. The previously unused glue bottle. Nice little rinsing method. You want to keep your whetstone wet. You also want to remove the buildup as often as you can. You want your blade or whatever you're sharpening to be contacting the stone, not the dust you're making as you sand. I don't even have anything cool to say about this. I hate this whole process. If you are a sharpener, if you are a person who sharpens tools, and you want shout outs on every video, I'll tell people where you are, just sharpen my stuff for me. I hate this. I don't even know, like with other aspects of woodworking, if I run into something that I don't particularly like, whether it's cutting joinery when I was first learning that, and I was like, oh, this actually sucks. I actually enjoyed it. But just as an example, I will research better techniques. Not with this. I hate this so much. I care so little about it that I don't even want to know a better way to do it. I just don't want to do it. So this is probably not the best technique. I'm just going around. I know I've watched other people sharpen things before and they do it differently. I just hate it. I do know you want to make sure you're maintaining a nice flat, even contact. On a cold morning with the door open and the nice cool breeze blowing in, you want to trickle as much water all over yourself as possible. Just really soak in the moment of enjoying sharpening. I hate sharpening things. I don't know why. Knives, chisels, anything. I can do it. I hate it. I could be in an office. I could be making calls. I could be doing sales. I could be filming commercials. I could be an actor, a terrible one. I could be so many other things. I hate sharpening things. I could be doing anything else right now. I hate sharpening things. I hate sharpening things. I don't know why. Knives, chisels, anything. I can do it. I hate it. Okay. That was one of the worst things I've ever done in my life. I hate sharpening things. I hate sharpening. I don't know why. Knives, chisels, anything. I can do it. I hate it. Much sharper though. And now, now we get back to work. So if you can see, I've got solid connection. Wood to wood, everything is nice and tight. Ever the interrupter. Everything is tight. It's just got a bevel, or a chamfer, so it has a shadow line. Now from a distance, it's barely noticeable. It's a little more noticeable in person. But it just gives it a nice little effect. And again, the addition of this shadow line gives us the ability to see if I'm going to zoom again. Get ready. Ooh. Okay. Now you can see there's a slight imperfection there, but it's okay because you cannot tell from out here because the whole thing has a purposeful shadow line. And this is a pretty good zoom with my own human eyes. It's real hard to see that there's anything there. No one's ever going to be looking at the piece this closely. Second upright is in place. They're so tall. All right, next step is to drop the mortises into the corresponding sections on the legs. So everything will lock together and we'll have our frame, except for the top, mostly assembled. Then I'll have to take it back apart, drop the dados in, everything, so that the plywood fits. But first, we get it assembled. The last pocketed mortise is done. I used paddle bit on my drill press to set the depth of the mortise, and then just went back in with the chisel and cleaned it up square. Test fit everything, and they are nice and tight. When you have multiple interlocking pieces, by the way, this is what I wanted to show you earlier. Corresponding half lap, and then at the bottom is our little pocketed mortise. When you have corresponding interlocking pieces like this, the upper portion of the mortise, and this is my personal opinion, maybe other more schooled people out there would disagree, but the top of the mortise I care a little bit less about, as long as it goes in with a decently tight enough fit. And as I was mentioning earlier, you kind of want a little bit of room anyway for your glue, and to account for the swelling and everything of the wood. But I leave the bottom, the pocket portion of the mortise, I leave this a bit tight. It's kind of difficult to show you because that's a tall piece, but if I remember, I'll demonstrate when I put it together later. The tenon will slide through this with relative ease, push a little bit, but then when it gets into this, I want to actually tap it in and have it be tight. Again, this is a personal preference. I use this, the tightness of the bottom of the pocket, to hold things in alignment. I also leave a little gap at the bottom. That's where the pool of glue can rest and make really good contact with the bottom of your tenon. So it's now time to go grab a refill and then get to work with the dados. I've got to lay out where the dados go. A dado, I guess I should explain. A dado is a channel in the center or within the span of a board, any given board. There will be dados in both the plywood panel and the outer frame. Plywood panel dados will be about 1/4 inch deep by, I think, 1 3/4 inches wide, if that's what I remember this being. That will accept and hold those so that ultimately they sit rather flush. I have them protruding just a bit with the face of the plywood. Purpose of the dados in these, in the frame, actually the legs don't get any top dados. They will have a side dado. I'll show you why in a bit. But the purpose of these dados is to hold the plywood itself, so it will slot down into the wood, into the frame, and doesn't require nails, it doesn't require screws, no fasteners. It just sits in a pocket, and then you put glue in there if you want to. You don't even necessarily have to glue. In fact, in certain cases, you specifically do not want to glue your dados. In this case, it won't really matter too much. I could, if I wanted to leave the dados dry, that would give me the option of pulling out the plywood panel in the future if ever it got damaged. But in this case, there's going to be so much attached to this panel. If ever the panel gets damaged, I will find a way to repair it within the piece. It's not going to be practical to pull it out. So I'm probably going to glue everything and make it one cohesive unit. Maybe I should expound just a bit. Maybe not. That's a different video. Okay, that's it. Time for a refill. I feel like I was probably in the middle of saying something and then I got distracted. I didn't finish what I was saying. Dados, when I get back, we'll drop the panel in. We sally forth. All right, I'm back with a refill. We can carry on. It's time to drop the dados in. If you were paying attention, you may have noticed I have not yet put the mortises in the top spanner. I haven't forgotten. I'm just waiting. I could go ahead and measure and place them just like I have all the other joinery that I've done, but I want these to be precise, because these are going to be through mortise and tenon as opposed to the bottoms that are pockets. You'll never see the bottom joinery, you just see a board sitting on top of another board. these will be through, and I might even go so far as to let them be proud, sticking above the surface, and then tusk them. I'll show you what that means later. But this is going to be visible joinery. So it's going to be more accurate if I put the dados in, drop the plywood in place, get everything where it's going to be, go ahead and fully assemble the piece, and then cut my mortises at the top so that everything matches up perfectly. It's likely, since I've been measuring and I've got my measuring tools are very accurate. See all these little lines on here. It's very likely that it would be fine if I measured and cut now, but I don't want to take any chances. I just want to wait and make sure everything is as tight as I can make it on the tops, because you'll see them. So I'm going to set this aside for now. This is my top spanner without any holes or anything, just cut as it was yesterday. Set that aside and start dropping dados in. I've got to plan the dados because not all of them will be through dados. I think I explained what a dado was. For the uprights, pretend this is an upright, they will be from top to bottom all the way through, because the plywood is going to be resting against this. For the bottom, I want that dado to stop just shy of the joinery so I don't cut into my joinery. So I'll have to dado the middle using the table saw. I'll drop the board into the saw, cut through as close as I can, and then finish out the two ends by hand. I think that's about it. There's not a ton of dado work that needs to be done on the frame itself. The most problematic is going to be the big piece of plywood that I have to drop 3 dados into. I'll figure that out later. But let's do it. All right, quick section here. This is a dado stack. Dado stacks should not be used on job site table saws. This is a job site table saw. An actual shop table saw would be much larger, like a Powermatic or a Jet or something along those lines. This is a Bosch. It's a fine table saw. I like it. It's just not really made for this. So don't do this. It's not exactly safe. Reason being, first of all, while I'm setting this up, always, if you're going to change the blade or do anything to the blade, any tool at all, always unplug the tool. I like to test the button, make sure it's off. What was I saying? A job site table saw has a smaller spindle. That's the piece that holds the blade. Generally a smaller motor. It's just wiggly. The stand it's on, or if it's sitting on the ground, it's just an awkward position at best, or wiggly and dangerous at worst. So don't use dado stacks. Don't use dado stacks on job site table saws. I'm a professional. I'm gonna do dumb stuff. The spindle on this saw is not big enough to hold enough stack. So a dado stack, you can add or remove as many blades as you like to make room for your stack, to cut the size dado that you need. The size dado that I need at present is a 3/4 inch dado. This stack will go up to that, but the spindle will not hold it. So we've got to use I believe this is going to be 3/8 Won't be enough for what we want. We will have to, I'll have to move. I'll have to move the fence after every cut. But that's fine. Cutting 3/8 of an inch at a time is better than cutting 1/8, which is what a saw blade kerf generally is. This should probably just be a voiceover because I'm far away and making noise, and it's not going to be great. Plus, you can't even see my face most of the time. Maybe we just don't even use this. Maybe it's not necessary. I don't know. What do you think, editor? Okay. Okay. This is probably the part where a regular professional would just pretend like nothing happened. But I want to show what actually happens in the shop. It is at this moment, about to drop the dados into the frame, that I have realized all of my measurements are wrong. I'll explain. This piece of plywood, you can see the corner of it there, is what I'm using as the back section. If I still had my drawing over here somewhere, here we go. So, big piece of plywood back here. All of these exploded pieces of frame is what we've been working on. I measured that piece of plywood a couple days ago when I was planning out this job, and came up with the measurements for my frame based off of the plywood. So if the plywood will fit nicely inside, blah, blah, blah. What I just now realized, I've done this so many times, it's something that should be in my head, but when doing custom projects, you repeat few things. There are a few things that get repeated. So you're always doing something new, always learning something new, always you forget stuff. And I forgot something very important when laying this project out. The dados. When I drop the plywood into the dados, it's going to, in essence, shrink or change the size of my plywood. So I've cut, for instance, the top and bottom spanners. And this might be a bigger issue than I was thinking because I've got, I don't know, I'm gonna have to think about it. Where is my? All right, top and bottom spanners. Here, bottom spanner. I've got the joinery cut in. I've got the mortises in place. The top one has no mortises, but the ends are chamfered. The hole, everything's done, and it's ready to become something. But the plywood is not going to be the size that I thought it was going to be. Which means I'm gonna have to, shrink. Yeah. the plywood is going to change the size. Can I cut the plywood down? I don't know. I'm gonna have to stop the video and sit down and figure this out and see how much trouble I'm in. But regardless, I built the frame to accommodate the size that the plywood is now. But when I drop the plywood into the dados, those dados are going to be a 1/4 inch thick or so, or deep. So I'm going to lose 1/2 inch on all sides of the plywood, which means I may have to cut down all of my frame, which is a much bigger issue, and I can't just cut the ends off because the ends are chamfered. So if I need to shrink this piece, I can't just cut some of this off. If I cut all of it off and redo the chamfer, then that's fine. But if I need to cut off this much of it, then one side's gonna look stupid. So, and then with the bottom piece, I can't do that at all because I have joinery here. So I can't cut off some of this. I would have to take space out of the middle, and that's not great. It could be done. If I needed to take space out of the middle, sure, I could cut it in half and then rejoin it back together and it would be fine. But that's time, and that's wasted time that I just messed up. It's difficult to think this stuff through. It's why the planning process is so vitally important, because I should have caught this initially. I just didn't. I was thinking about too many other things. So I'm gonna come up with a solution to this. Before I cut my dados, before I do any more work, I've got to stop and figure out what's gonna happen, because anything that I do now could make it worse. So until I know what's happening, everything stops. Okay, I've had time to sit down and sip some coffee and stare at my sorrows for a bit. And I was right initially. I need to either shrink the frame down or grow the plywood. I don't have a plywood stretcher in this shop yet. And I can't really cut the frame down. If time was not a factor, I would rather cut the frame down, because I could cut in the middle, re-splice it back together. It would be as strong as ever, and problem solved. It would even add a bit more beauty to it, because there would be an unnecessary, but at least attractive joint in the middle. But I don't have time to do that. Where did you find an octopus? Where was that? Okay. There's an octopus over there now. A stuffed one. I don't know where it came from. What was I saying? I don't have time to do that. So my other option then is to grow the plywood. That'll be the quickest way, and it would actually give a chance to add some beauty, because what I'm gonna do is make sure the edges of the plywood are clean, and then I will rip down some small pieces of cherry or oak or whatever I feel like is gonna soak up the most glue. Might be red oak. Rip down some small pieces, which they already exist on the shop floor. This is cherry, but it's a thin piece. I could just rip it a little bit more, and this would probably solve the problem. I might use this piece, in fact. So these already exist. Rip them down, glue them, tack them to the edge of the plywood. Once that glue sets up, it is one with the plywood. It won't be a weak spot. It'll be just as strong as the rest of the plywood. That's all plywood is. It's just glued together pieces of wood. That's gonna be, and then these will in essence be runners that slot into the dados and do their job. It's unfortunate, it's not what I wanted, and it is gonna add a little more time. Not a ton, but it is gonna add a little more time. I could if I didn't care about the quality of my work, I could make it work as is. The plywood is a little larger than the space that it needs to fit into. It needs to be half an inch larger than the space it needs to fit into to account for the dados. It's not. It's about a fat eighth of an inch. That is still larger. I could run a very tiny dado, a little over a 16th of an inch, and I could claim that the plywood is set into a dado. It would be glued in place, and it would be strong. It would be there. The problem is I just care about the quality of my work, and I don't want my clients to be upset when it breaks on them. If something breaks, it's going to be due to it being overstressed. It's just furniture can break. We all have seen broken furniture. Doesn't mean that the furniture was built poorly. It just means it was overstressed. It encountered something that it wasn't designed to do. So if my piece breaks, it's not going to be due to poor craftsmanship. So I'm not going to do that. I could, and it would be much faster if I did. I just could never live with myself. So I'm going to take the time to add the runners to the sides of the plywood. That really won't take that long at all, especially if I can use this piece. I may just rip it in half and stick it on. We're good to go. Then I can move right along. It'll add 20 minutes to my day. Well, this whole process, finding out what's gone, it's already taken about 20 minutes. But in total, by the time I'm all said and done, this mistake will have cost me about an hour of my day. That sucks. It slows the project down, and I'm not proud of it. But this stuff happens. We are human, and this I wanted to show everyone who works on stuff, every custom woodworker, metalworker, glass, whatever your thing is. If you're doing stuff custom, it's gonna have mistakes sometimes. You gotta fix them. How you deal with a mistake is what determines whether you're good at your job or not. Even factory stuff. I've worked in one factory, and those big multi-million-dollar machines break down every day. So stuff goes wrong. You gotta fix it. You make a mistake in life, you get up and you keep going. Or you don't, and you regret it later. Okay, that's enough of that. Here we go. All right, I've cut down the runners and hooked up the compressor and gotten everything ready to go, just about to attach them, and then I realized this is kind of a blessing in disguise, because I want to stain this piece. The pieces that are already in place I have not stained. I just put a natural Rubio monocoat over them to keep the ash plywood nice and white, light. This I want to be dark though, so I'm going to stain this, and what I didn't want is for the stain to impede loud trucks. I didn't want the stain to get in the way of the glue, so I need to stain it before I put it in the frame, because I don't want to get stain on the cherry. I only want to stain the ash. But if I stain it first and then try to glue it, then the stain will fill the pores that the glue needs to fill, and then it won't be as good of a hold. If I try and glue it first and then stain it, then I risk getting stain all over the cherry. So this kind of works out, because I can stain it free of the frame, get it all sanded and stained, and then it'll be easily accessible. I can make sure no stain gets on the edges. I can very quickly, while the stain is drying even, glue and tack the runners on so everything kind of dries together and the stain doesn't get in the way of the glue. So it kind of works out. Then when I go to glue the plywood into the frame, the runners will have no stain on them. They'll be solidly glued to the plywood and everything is fine. So kind of works out, but I'm not ready to stain the plywood. I need to sand it. I need to do a bunch of other stuff to prep it. So I'm gonna let that rest because the glue is gonna be sitting up overnight. The stain will be drying overnight. So I'll do all of that at the end of the day, probably the last step of the day. Now that I have a plan and I know what's going on with all of that, I can go back to cutting my dados and everything else because I know what's going on. The only thing I'm going to change, which again, I'm fine with, is this. I'm going to shrink the overall height of the project by 1/2 an inch. It's not going to make a difference with anything at all, except this. So with joinery, this is the tenon, this is the shoulder. And there are certain spots, I don't know if the camera can pick it up as well as the human eye, you can tell a little bit there. Certain spots where I'm not super happy with the shoulder. It's not exactly flat, just kind of rushed trying to get this job done, and I didn't take the time that I should have. Since I get to now shrink the whole project by 1/2 an inch, I get to redo these shoulders. Very quickly, very simply, I just mark a 1/2 inch line. All I'm doing is moving the shoulder down. I don't care about the tenon. It can be however long it's going to be. I'm going to cut that off later anyway. So this doesn't matter. I couldn't change the shoulder down here because this is pocketed. This is already where it needs to be. I can't change this into the joinery, but the top being a through tenon, I can change that and it won't matter at all because all I would have to do is just trim the tenon down 1/2 an inch more than I was going to. That's fine. So I get to rework the top shoulders, which are going to be more visible than anything as far as the shoulders go. So that's nice. I get a little try again here and it won't take any time at all. So even though it was a mistake and it sucks, you get to try again. It's a good thing about mistakes. You get to fix stuff. And in this case, you get to fix more things that weren't part of that initial mistake. Carry on. All right. So I've got my dado set up where it needs to be. I've used this combination square to find the center of the board and then lay out the outside edges of my dado. And then to test it, we'll transfer it to this little cutoff. This is a piece that I think this was the lower. This is the lower spanner, just to cut off when we cut it down to length. So it's exactly the same width as, well, this is the upper, but the lower is over there. So this is the same width as all of our pieces. We're going to run it through here and just test it out, make sure it fits. I have already tested it once, but I forgot to record. So we're just going to redo it. Plywood, dado. Beautiful. Without glue or anything, just the friction holds it in place. That's wonderful. But it's not so tight that it's impossible to move around. It's just perfect. It's beautiful. I love it. All right, now we've got to transfer this dado to the upper spanner, lower spanner, both uprights and the legs. Here we go. Now that all the dados have been cut in place, it's time to assemble for the first time. A lot of projects are like this. You will assemble and disassemble multiple times throughout the process. You've got to see exactly how everything's fitting together, especially me, since I can't see things in my head. I need to see it in person. I have decided to nix the dados on the legs. I'm calling them legs. They're not really legs. They're just the piece at the bottom. I have yet to cut the legs. Reason being, it's just not. There's one downside to living, or my shop being right on the main street and living here. It's also going to be rough once I get the upstairs built out. My bedroom will be on the street. It's going to be cool. I've decided to nix the dado on the legs. It's not necessary. It would be a little cleaner. It would make me feel a little better. But it's going to be a little more work. And for the sake of speed, I'm just going to put a ledger board at the bottom. So instead of the bottom plywood shelf slotting into a dado, that would stop somewhere in here. And the plywood just kind of slots in there. I'm just going to put a ledger board here at the bottom, just glue and tack it in place, and then set the plywood on top of that. It'll be sufficiently strong enough. It'll hold hundreds of pounds, and it only needs to hold a few pounds. There's a fire somewhere. Probably a wreck. Probably someone has done something foolish on the road. I hope they're fine. But could you try wrecking at a time that I'm not recording the video? Like early in the morning or late at night? You shut up too, you loud crow. Anyway, no dados on the legs. So I believe I'm done with the dados for now. Now I am going to assemble, get it all put together in one piece, and then I'll know exactly where I need to clean the dados to. What I mean by that is this. This is that top spanner. The top of it and the bottom of it now has a dado. However, until I know exactly where the upright is going to connect here, I'm not 100% sure where this dado needs to stop. It's okay if the dado continues into the mortise. That's not going to be a problem. In fact, it kind of has to, because it has to match up with the dado from the upright. And that's going to be 1/4 inch into the wood. So I've got to make sure there's enough room top and bottom for the plywood to meet. So somewhere in here, I've got to square up and clean that to completion. Same on this end. I just kind of went as close as I was comfortable with the saw, and the rest will be done by hand. So with these bottom dados, again, I decided they're going to terminate within the mortise. That way, when the top piece comes down, the plywood slots in, everything is just fine. So I've got to finish this out by hand, and a little bit there by hand. And then we get to put it all together. There's more sirens coming. Just infinite sirens. That was a fire truck going the other direction. There's been a fire truck going in two different directions. I guess a fire truck can function as EMS. Well, they're EMS, not an ambulance. Why would a fire truck need to go in both directions, or is that two different fire trucks? Why not use the truck on the other end of town that was already there? I don't know. Okay, back to work. All right, I've had to zoom the camera out so you can get a better view. Things look a little fisheye, that's why. But here you can get an idea as to what the final product's gonna look like. There will be angled supports from here to here that are the bread box. So the bread box itself along the bottom will hold this thing in square alignment. It's just loosely set together, and it's not even in the dados or anything, so you can see here small gaps along. But even with it just being loosely set in place, it looks pretty clean. And those shadow lines there at the bottom, putting in some nice work. They'll be corresponding with the ones at the top. I'm excited to see this thing come together. So there will be another plywood shelf along the bottom that holds this piece square, the legs square with the main body. as well as that is the bottom of the bread boxes. And then, as I said, the sides of the bread boxes go here and hold that square that direction. And then there will be a couple dividers in the middle. And then these guys, our big dovetail, big long dovetail, and the two adjustable shelf portions. I really need to put some stuff away. These will go up here along the top. So adjustable shelf pegs on either side, dovetail in the middle. That's what I'm about to dado into place next. That's the next step. So putting those dados in, as well as the top piece. I may, just for safety's sake, I may wait and do that tomorrow. That'll be the last piece of this. That way today I can spend the rest of the time sanding, staining, dropping dados in place, getting those all glued together. Put the runners on the edges. Just finish out all the plywood stuff. I can build the bread boxes and all of that. And then once it is finally assembled, or at least in its final stage, with everything where it's supposed to be, totally set into the dados all around and nice and square, then I can put the top on. I believe that's how I'm going to do it. So now to disassemble, drop the dados into the big plywood piece. We roll on next. Laying out the dados reminded me that I'm a bit ahead of myself. The middle dovetail just goes in the middle, directly in the center of the plywood. The other two pieces, the rails, or I guess that's the rail actually, these are just the adjustment pieces. The placement of these depends entirely on the shelf. And as fate would have it, all of the shelves that I have built are installed at the job site. Well, I guess this is the job site. They're installed at their final house. I have a lot of material to build new shelves. I just haven't put them together yet because I've been working on this. But now at this stage, I realize I need at least one shelf in order to know where to put these. So I cannot progress further here because I can't cut the dados until I know where they go. That leaves me two options. I can either put together the shelves, which I'm going to need, I believe, 3 shelves for this, and they have to be put together anyway. But since I'm all by me onesie here, except for the dog and my editor, that means I have to move everything that I'm working on. I have to put all that stuff away, get out all the tools to put together the shelves, find all my clamps, get all those put together, get the glue out, get a bucket of water to clean glue up. There's a lot of things that go into just simply putting shelves together. Everything's cut out. I just have to assemble the shelves. That's just have to assemble the shelves is a lot of work. If I had a helper, he could be doing that. They could be doing that while I'm working on this, but I'm all alone. So I really don't want to do that. I've got a good amount of workflow going, and if I come to a grinding halt here, and it's just going to stop everything. It slows everything down. My other option would be to go to where I already have everything installed and steal a shelf, which I think I'm going to do because it'll be the same. I need it to match. I just need to do that. I think that's the best option. So I'm going to go do that. It's just coincidentally, there's hot coffee over there. That's nice. All right, it is 6 o'clock. I generally try and stop working around 5, but I'm almost to a good stopping point. I've got all the dados cut. I've got everything fitted in nicely. I had to really grab some pin nails. So again, if I had all the time in the world, I would rather not put any fasteners in this. I would rather just use glue and traditional joinery. But I need to speed things up. So I don't have time to clamp this and let that dry and then take it apart and then sand and stain. So I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna glue all of these pieces into the dado as they belong in, and I'm gonna tack them with little tiny 23 gauge pin nails. They're super small, you won't see them. I know they're there. But it's okay. It's gonna hold everything in place, and then I can sand while the glue dries. The nails will hold it still so it doesn't mess up the glue. As soon as it's sanded, I'll be able to stain it, and that'll be a good stopping point for the day. That's where I wanted to end up. I've got to also attach the runners to the side. I was going to pin nail those anyway. So all is good. I am going to drop these in place, glue, nail, stain, sand the whole thing, and then stain, and then attach the sides, and that'll be it. And let the stain, let the glue dry overnight, and then move on. Fresh start tomorrow. So we're ending where I wanted to. Made good progress today. Just got probably another 30, 40 minutes to an hour. Maybe an hour plus. But we're getting there. I'll be done shortly. Dust masks don't do anything flattering to mustaches. Okay, that may have been a mistake. It's brown now. Okay, we're done. So, one more thing before I sign off for the night. And again, maybe I shouldn't be showing mistakes or flaws and things, but I want to be open and show you the real things that carpenters deal with. This, I'm not sure if it's going to show up well on camera, but there's a line right here. That line is a flaw in the plywood. It happens when it's being rolled through the machine where the glue is applied, and for whatever reason, the veneer is thinner. Here. You can kind of see it a little better over here, this line right here. The reason why it shows up more once it's been stained is because that's the glue that's holding the plywood together, is keeping the stain from getting into the pores, so really penetrating in the veneer on this plywood. Now, luckily for us, there's a bread box here, so that'll be covered up anyway, and it won't be a problem. And even if it wasn't covered, that's not super noticeable unless you're looking for it. But it's okay. I don't think I can do this with the camera facing this way. I feel way too bouncy. That's better. Okay. You can see a little better on this camera. That line there, and there's a little dot right there where it's just the glue showing up through the plywood veneer. But as I said, this is all from this point down is bread box, so that's not going to be seen at all. Another thing that I notice, and maybe some other woodworkers would notice, but the general layperson wouldn't, or they may notice it, they just don't know the cause of it, so it doesn't stand out. This spot here, oh, it focused on my hand. That spot up there, there's another little spot over here. And there was another one I saw. There's a little bit here. These are, I should have used a wood conditioner. Oh, that grain is just beautiful though, is it not? This is cathedral grain. When it has these big flares like this, it's called cathedral grain. And it is beautiful in this ash. Ash complements oak really well. This is red oak, that's red oak. The rest is all ash. It just complements it really well. Anyway, off topic. These spots, wood conditioner would have most likely solved that. That's just where, for whatever reason, whether there's some oil in here or what, it could be any number of reasons, but the stain just took differently in those spots than it did over the rest of the piece. So a wood conditioner would go through and kind of even out everything. That's what you put on before the stain, and then your stain is nice and even. I'm not worried about it on this project in particular because this is going to be next to some old furniture that my client is using to display their wares on. And this just looks old. That kind of adds to the aged appearance. So I'm not upset about it on this project. If this were a different project where spots like that would be a problem, then I would most likely sand it all down and restart. Or I would have applied a wood conditioner before I even stained anything. Man, that grain is beautiful. Look at that. Anyway, I just wanted to point out those flaws because that's what we do here. We show our flaws. Anyway, see you tomorrow. I'm sleepy.